In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. True leadership begins when we align professional ambition with personal evolution. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're exploring 3 transformative themes: leading with authenticity, building resilient professional and personal identities, and redefining success through the whole human approach. Our guest today is Peter Sorgenfrei, a globally recognized CEO, founder, and coach and creator of the whole human approach. Drawing from decades of experience in global organizations and entrepreneurial ventures, Peter's coaching philosophy empowers leaders to evolve holistically, aligning the career with personal fulfillment. His expertise in behavioral science and human understanding makes him a trusted advisor for top executives around the world. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Peter Sorgenfrei, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Sam.
It's lovely to see you here. It's my first time meeting you, and what you're doing is extraordinarily important and quite impressive as well. To kick us off, tell us more about the whole human approach.
So the whole human approach was born out of a need to see people as whole humans, and that may sound counterintuitive, but we talk a lot about work-life balance, and we go to work and we go home, and it's like it's 2 different humans. And my whole philosophy is it's not. We are one whole human, and we have a personal life and a professional life, and we have tactics and we have strategies to get through that life and to live that life. And so that's the underpinning of the whole human approach.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it seems like one thing that was very interesting to me is obviously some of the founder's journey that you've been through, obviously from garage startups all the way to global scales. Perhaps tell us more about what it was experiencing building 6 companies through basically, I suppose, quite hardware starts, but to a beautiful finish like that.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a longer story, but essentially I got into entrepreneurship a little bit by accident, by being in a corporate job I hated. And so I wanted to do something different. And I decided to start my first business. Nobody in my family had ever done that, and it was kind of random. But as you allude to, I managed to do 6 companies over the subsequent 15 years. And one of the things that I was missing during that time was to have somebody to talk to who was not an investor, who was not my co-founder, not my board, not my partner, but talk about all the things that happen when you go from 2 in the garage to several hundred people across the world. And when I, in 2019, was done building business and got sick, and maybe we'll talk about this as well, I realized that now is the time for me to start helping founders manage what I didn't have the help to manage when I was coming up through the ranks.
Beautiful. What type of lessons? Obviously, there were ups and downs, but what type of lesson can you perhaps share with what it is to just build a startup from the ground up, and some of the most valuable piece of advice that help you doing such thing?
So I think for a lot of people who start companies, it starts with an idea or a desire to try and realize something. And so in the beginning, you're very much the specialist, right? You have some knowledge or you have something that you want to do. But then what happens as the thing hopefully comes successful commercially, you start having a lot of different stakeholders. You start having employees, you start having potential investors, you start having customers. And as an individual, it's actually easy to grow the business, but it's very difficult to grow yourself. Who are you going to lean on and learn from to know, how am I, Sam, going to be a manager of 15 people? with all the personnel things that come up and all the conversations? And how do I deal with professional investors whose interests are in this direction of making money in the next 3 to 5 years, but my interests are seeing my little baby, my little business become a teenager and become an adult. So there's a bunch of forces that pull you in different directions. And so the biggest lesson that I had was developing myself was, if not as important, maybe even more important than developing the business. But nobody helped me do that. And so I ended up where I ended up today, helping others accomplish that.
I quote this quite often, but I think Jim Rohn said it best, which in if you want to have more than what you have, you need to become more than who you are. You said something I think worth going deeper into, though, Peter. You said, growing the business is easy, but growing yourself is the difficult part. I think that actually many people will quite disagree, but I think it's an interesting take. What do you mean by that? What's the dichotomy between the two?
Well, in order to grow yourself, you have to realize that something could be better. And I think most people want to do better in certain aspects of life, but what they're looking at is they want to be able to sell better, or they want to be able to create more creative marketing or something. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the innate human habits and behavior that you have. We're all a product of our upbringing. And for some reason, some of that stuff helps us and serves us well, and some of that stuff is holding us back. But you have to start realizing, what is that stuff that is kind of holding you back from being all you can be in this business and growing yourself. And then 2, you have to do something about it and not just sort of sweep it under the rug because you're busy growing the business. And then 3, you have to figure out, how do I actually do it? Who will help me do this in a way? And there's tons of mentors and coaches and advisors out there. Trust me, I've worked with a lot of people in my time, but a lot of them actually don't understand what it means to be Sam Pepin. They don't understand the situation you're in, your personality, the business you're in, all these other things. And therefore, the advice that you're going to get is not going to be something that's going to move you forward in all aspects, only in some. And I think that's what's missing in the marketplace, and that's why I have a business today.
Interesting. You call your approach rigorous, serious, feels intense, but worked. What do you think that is giving you a competitive advantage, and what do you think that perhaps works so well in approach that might be a little bit more European-like? Let's call it this way.
Yeah. Well, so a couple of things. I get clients today because they understand I've been where they are, right? I've actually lived the life that they're living, or the life that they're going to go through and live. So compared to other coaches or mentors, I've actually built stuff and both succeeded and failed. And I'm very public about that. That's number one. Number 2, I don't really care if they become customers of mine. I think I've always in my all my businesses, I've had this attitude of, and that's just my personality. I have this thing. I think it's great. I think it could do great for you, Sam. But if you want to do it with me or not, I actually don't really worry too much about that, because I believe that the people that are right to work with me will come to me. 3, I spoke to a potential client this morning, and we were talking about how I work and stuff. And he goes, "So you mean you give me homework?" And I'm like, "Yep." "You mean we have to meet every single week for an hour? That's a lot of time." And I'm like, "Well, do you want to do this or not? I mean, if you want to have the changes that you need to put in the work, kind of like going to the gym. You're not going to get strong and healthy by going to the gym once a month. You have to put in the reps." And so that's why I'm demanding. I ask people to come into the mental gym with me to work on their mental fitness, to work on their physical fitness in order for them to get the change that they need. And that's not the case with many other coaches. Many other coaches, you'll meet maybe once a month, have a chat for an hour, go home, feel like you've accomplished something, not implement it, come back a month later. That's just not how I want to do it.
I love it. No, I love it, and you're definitely a practitioner of radical transparency, which is very interesting. You call homeworks behavior change, which is quite interesting. Why do you use that terminology, and perhaps what constitutes a behavioral change in your definition?
I think it was Einstein who said, if you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, you're crazy. He probably said it in different words. Normally I would look up quotes, but the point is, you're doing something every single day that is not getting you to where you need to go. And some of it is habits, right? The simplest habit is, you go the same way to your office if you don't work from your house, or you eat more or less the same things. So when I talk about behavior change, I actually talk to my clients about, if you want a different outcome in your relationship with your employees, if you feel like they're not living up to what you want them to do, you need to do things differently. And that's around habits. A great example, you're French Canadian, right? So in some cultures, it is super important to talk about a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with work in the beginning of a meeting. We kind of intuitively understand that. And in a world where people have employees from all over the world, knowing that when you're sitting down with Laurence, you chit-chat a little bit because that's what she needs. But when you're sitting down with Helmut, you go straight to the point because he doesn't want to waste any minute. And having that sensibility and not just relying on your habit, which is diving straight in, for example, and then you're losing Laurence, that's something. Those are some of the changes that I forced people to make.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned culture. We had an avid traveler on the show, Michael Teasdales, and I asked him this question, but I will ask him to you as well. When you're thinking about your life, your experience, your expertise, perhaps how did you came to the realization, and what's a couple of basically things that you saw from working with different culture? Obviously, different people are wildly different, but how do you approach that in a meaningful fashion in the workplace?
So now I'm going to go counter to what I just said, because for me personally, what's made me successful in different cultures is my radical transparency. I've not tried to be something I'm not. I've not tried to communicate in a way that I'm not. But what I have tried to do is I've tried to communicate how I am and how I operate and who I am. So I created many years ago something called the PUG, P-U-G, and it stands for the Peter User Guide. And it's essentially a document that describes how I prefer to work, how I prefer to communicate, what it means when my mood is this, what it means when I react like that. So, and this was not my idea. I had my first assistant was a brilliant woman, who may be listening to this at some point. And she said, Peter, people don't know you. They don't understand who you are. They don't understand your motivation. Why don't you write it down? Because it will make your interactions much easier. We were building my first company together. And so I did, and I've done it ever since, and I encourage everybody else to do it. I essentially explain myself before we get into an interaction, and then people are like, oh, if I need to tell Peter something important, I need to do it in writing, briefly, in an email. Great, got it. It's not a text message. It's not a phone call. It's not, because then he's just going to get annoyed. It sounds simple, but so many people don't actually explain how they operate, and therefore people have to guess, and therefore you have conflicts. Also in an international setting.
Interesting. I want to talk to the breaking point, because you alluded to it earlier in this conversation, but the collapse that changed everything perhaps is how I see it. Back in 2019, obviously, big collapse, physical and mental collapse. And I want you to, if you can, in a very emotional fashion, explore some of the challenges that you personally faced when your well-being take a back seat, and perhaps over basically power your professional demands. How was that time? Describe it briefly, please.
So I didn't think anything was wrong. I thought everything was going swimmingly. I've worked a lot. I traveled on planes twice every week. I had told my board at the time, we were in the process of selling my company, and they asked me how I was doing. And I'd used the expression, it feels like I'm the fighter pilot in a fighter jet, but I'm hanging onto the wing, looking into the cockpit, and there's nobody at the steering. That's how it feels. And if I'd had a different board, somebody might have said, wait a minute, this guy's in trouble, let us help him. But they didn't. So I go skiing with my son. I live in Europe. I live in Copenhagen. We had driven to Austria a week earlier, drive back from Austria. It's a 15-hour drive, straight drive. I've done it before, physically no problem. I go to bed, and the next morning, I can't get out of bed. I'm supposed to go to work. It's a Monday. I physically cannot move. And you can see me and your audience can't, but, I'm a bald, white-bearded guy. I'm 50 years old. I thought I'd had a brain tumor or something. I thought I'd been paralyzed. But it turned out it was just stress. It was just because my brain essentially had said, I cannot transmit information from one side to the other anymore. The pipes have clogged up because they've been misused and abused for so many years. And so as I'm lying there, I eventually, my sister comes over. She's a psychologist. She spots it immediately. We call my head of HR. I get shut out of the business, so I don't get any information from the business. They take care of the business, and I take care of myself. 6 weeks after, I try to go back to work, and I sit down in front of a computer, and I look at a calendar, and I have no idea what I'm looking at. I mean, it could have been Greek letters. It could have been, some expressionist painting. I had no idea what I was looking at. And so I go back on sick leave. 6 weeks after that, my board chairman calls me and says, Peter, we have to let you go. The buyer of the business has jumped because you're not part of it anymore. Typically, founder-led companies are sold with the founder, right? And I was relieved. I was like, my shoulders came down. I was like, it's over. I'm finally free in some way. And then the process of rebuilding started, and we can get into that, if you will.
Wow. Everything collapsed, but I was relieved. That's interesting. You were talking about the analogy of your baby startup going to teenage phase and adulthood and so on. Tell me more about kind of like the paradox of that stress, not only paralyzing you at that moment, but when sometimes a business becomes so consuming and so self-harming in your case that it overpower basically who you are to a point where, again, you cannot physically go out of bed. What do you think caused that? I know you mentioned stress, but what would that stress coming from if you had to guess?
From being an environment where I felt like I needed to be in control of everything, but I wasn't in control. And an environment where I didn't live my values. I wasn't being true to who I was and who I am. I was trying to satisfy the needs of investors, board members, my team, customers, without actually being true and honest to how I wanted to do things. What happens a lot, Sam, and I've seen this with many clients now, is from the time you start a company to like 3, 4, 5 years in, you little by little lose yourself in a way because you're starting to make decisions that acquiesce to the needs and the desires of others, either because you think they know better, but you have a feeling that what they're proposing is not right, or because you simply do not notice that you're the frog in the pot on the stove and the water is getting warmer and warmer and warmer until the minute that you're cooked, right? That's what happens. You're running around in 18 different directions. In my case, I was home a lot with my family. I actually didn't work that many hours, but I wasn't present with my partner. I wasn't as present with my kids as I could be. I wasn't sleeping at night. I wasn't exercising. I basically stopped doing a bunch of stuff that had kept me sane. And eventually the film just broke. And that's where stress comes from. It's when you stop doing the things that are who you are. So just to round that off, I typically tell people that if you don't feel like yourself, if you feel like something is off, it probably is. And it's time to start talking to somebody about it.
Yeah. One of my first mentor told me, Sam, you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? As founder and as entrepreneur, we have this understanding that basically if I just work harder, it will be better. If I just put in more hours, if I just don't sleep or go to the gym in the morning, I have more time to dedicate to my business. And it can become extremely toxic. And I think that in my understanding of your journey, that collapse actually made you kind of like birth the whole human approach, from the fact that obviously you were collapsing yourself. Um, when you unpack the whole approach itself and how it integrates obviously mental, physical, emotional health, and also obviously professional ambitions, how does that overlays? What's some of your inspiration to put it together? And perhaps tell us more about just how effective this process is.
Well, first of all, the inspiration was just looking at my own life. Because I may not have been physically at the office, but mentally I was at the office, right? We all run around with our phones. Most people just have one phone, which is both your personal device and your professional device. So it's not about work-life balance anymore. It's work-life integration. So I started thinking about ways where I could have lived a healthier life, some rules, if you will, some habits, as we talked about, that could have gotten me to a place where I still was the present, caring father and partner that I had been before I started the company, right? So that was an inspiration. Another inspiration was like literally just looking out into the world and saying, how are we supposed to live, right? What does it mean to live the good life? It means to be happy when you get up in the morning and go into work. It means to be worry-free when you're on the weekend with your family or in the evening. And then what is required for you to get there? And part of that, and which is part of the whole human approach, is you need to get a handle on yourself. So when I start working with clients, first I need to get them back to where they want to be. So if you and I were working together, I'd say, okay, Sam, who are you? And you'd be like, whoa, Peter, that's a big question. I'm like, all right, well, let's unpack it. Who are you actually as a human being? Who do you want to be when you go out into the world? Well, I'd like to be this. I'm like, have you been that before? Yes, I have been some of it, but not all of it. Okay. Well, how do we get you back there? And so that's why it's impactful. It's because I literally start moving you from a place where you don't want to be to a place where you want to be. And then once we're there, and that's the first 3 weeks or so of us working together, then we start instituting the new habits that make sure that you stay there, right? That you don't fall back into the old routines of doing the things that have gotten you out of place. And then the last period of time that I work with people is, okay, how do we actually make sure that this sticks, right? So once I leave you, once I say, thank you very much, I appreciate having worked with you, that you can do this on your own. So what are some of the self-discipline things that you need to learn how to do?
It's one thing that always strike me. One of my partner actually always told me, "Hey Sam, balance is impossible, but you can strive for harmony." And you use that word quite a bit. I actually found that quote from you, which I love, which is harmony is not about achieving balance in one moment, but aligning your life over time. Uh, I think there's some beauty there when you're conjuncting kind of like being joyful and being happy, or just happiness as a major topic, long term approach type of I suppose lines time labs. I One thing that always strike me as being something to look for is if you have any emotional spikes that are very recurring. So you're very, very happy at one moment, but then you're super sad at the other, and kind of like not a bipolar way, but just in a way that is very, very fragile. Um, when you see some of your clients comes to you for some type of basically coaching and consulting, professional coaching and consulting, do you see that perhaps when you're thinking about where they currently are and that's not where they want to be, what coming from your process, do you see this as sometimes a major problem as an entrepreneur? This kind of like emotional fragility and instability, basically, of regulating themselves.
Yes. So if you we can't stereotype, but at the same time we can stereotype. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are really focused on proving something to the world, right? Proving that their idea has a place to be. So that's one thing that they have going for them. And so they get a dopamine kick when somebody says, that's a great idea. I might want to buy that product or service from you. Most entrepreneurs, they're like, holy smokes, this is amazing. I'm great. But similarly, if somebody says, I'm not sure I want to buy this from you, some entrepreneurs then go all the way down like, what do you mean you don't like my baby? My baby is perfect. My baby is an extension of me. Don't you like me? And then it becomes this whole thing. Many of the clients that I work with have this. They have weeks where they're in seventh heaven and they're like super happy and everything is great. And it's just because maybe they got an article in TechCrunch or something, right? Which honestly means nothing. So to anybody listening, getting covered in a trade magazine or winning a prize or stuff, it's nice for your ego, but it does nothing for your business. So just to put that out there on the record. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You just need to put it into perspective. And so then the next week, a big customer who they thought was going to become a customer doesn't want to become a customer. Not because they don't want to pay for what you're selling, but because they don't think what you're selling is good enough, essentially. Right? And then they're like, everything is over. The entire business is going to go down the drains. I don't know how I can get through this. So the thing that I try to work with people on is the highs, we need to take a little bit of the edge off, right? We need to put it into perspective. And the lows, similarly, is this the end of the world? Probably not. Can we use this as a learning moment and build a better product or sell it to somebody else to whom it fits better? Probably yes. So we need to take the extremes out of the emotional setup. Maybe that was a long answer, but the point here is entrepreneurs, and now we're back to the stereotyping, are often very passionate people, really big believers. And when you're really passionate and a big believer, if somebody says you're great, it gets magnified. And if somebody says you're not so great, it also gets magnified. And that's what we need to level out.
Because you worked and coach over 40 SEOs, CEOs, and founders, and sharing stories, obviously, of calm minds and healthier lives and improved relationships alongside with their businesses. I'm wondering, when you look at a successful founder, not just the enterprise itself, but the founder themselves, is there any common traits that you can share if you had to basically teach somebody that is just barely starting basically in this journey of theirs, to say, well, you know what, if you focus on these key traits, your obviously likelihood of success will increase dramatically. Do you have any of those perhaps common traits you can share with the audience?
Yes, I actually want to use some famous examples for people to get the sort of the difference. So if you look at Mark Zuckerberg, right, at Facebook, the reason Mark is so successful and still so successful is he is maniacally his own man, right? He basically does what he thinks is right no matter what. He has a mentality and some genes that says the whole world might say that this is a bad idea, but I still believe it and I do it and I don't worry about what everybody else thinks. And he's done that from day one. So he has something which makes him unique. It's similar to Elon Musk, right? Same thing. Super smart guys, obviously, not so good with other people, but really determined on this is the right way. So that's one trait. That some entrepreneurs are like that, they become successful. Another famous example is Jack Dorsey, the guy who founded Twitter and Square. And so Jack is different because he's successful because he manages himself well. He's always been focused on eating healthy, living healthy, having healthy work habits. He's super structured around how he does things. He protects himself against crazy environments by having routines and habits that allows him to be at his best when he needs to be. So two different approaches. Jack is much more inclusive, talks to people and stuff, but he preserves space for himself because he knows otherwise he's going to crash and burn. So I think, to sum it up, we all have to be different entrepreneurs. We have to be the entrepreneur that we are internally. So you can't look You can't look at Mark and say, I'm going to be like Mark, because you're not. And you can't look at Jack and say, I'm going to be like Jack, because you're not like Jack. So my advice to somebody is understand who you are and then stay as true to that as you possibly can for as long as you possibly can. There's going to be people who want you to be something different. There's going to be people who want your company to be something different. But the minute you start letting go of who you are and what you truly believe to be right about the business, that's when the route to potential burnout, potential stress, and certainly to potential failure in the business is going to start. So stay true to who you are for as long as you possibly can. That's my piece of advice.
Interesting. When you're talking about finding who you are, which is an initial piece of you obviously working with entrepreneurs, we live in a world now where, like you said, there's so many variables, so many people to choose from when you want to emulate or suppose take not only advice but just duplicate somebody else because they're successful. When you're thinking about that quest, that personal quest of self-discovery, when does that happen? When does that occur that one's fully understand itself? And tell me kind of like your approach to what it is to understanding who you are.
So I think it doesn't magically appear because, of course, we evolve as humans as we go through life. But if we're assuming here that you're past your teenage years, so you're in your 20s, biologically at this point, you basically have shaped up and formed, and your brain is basically grown back together, and you can remember things and listen when your parents ask you to do stuff, right? But if you're not sort of aware of it, if you don't have the self-awareness, you're just going to go down a path of taking a job because your dad thinks it's a good idea you work in a bank, and then that's what you're going to go do, and then you're down that train. So it requires a self-awareness. It requires you to work on yourself. And the easiest way to do that is ask yourself, put it in your calendar, every couple of months, sit down for a few hours, take out a piece of paper and saying, am I where I want to be? Am I doing what I want to be doing? Am I generally happy doing what I'm doing? Not every day, because you're going to have swings. Some people hate Mondays. Other people have a terrible time in November or December, right? Fine. But if you ask yourself those questions, and if you truthfully say, actually, I'm not where I want to be. I would like my life to look like this. I would like to have more freedom or flexibility, or I would like to work in a bank and not in a flower shop, or I would like to, whatever it is you want to do. Then ask yourself the next question, which is, how can I get there? What changes can I make in my life that gets me to that place? The mistake a lot of people make is they're like, you know what? I'm just going to grind it out for a couple of years at this law firm because then I've made so much money that then I can go pursue my passion to become a dressmaker. But what happens is you do that, you get stuck there, you get stuck to the lifestyle that it affords you, you start buying expensive stuff and live in an expensive house, and by the time you wake up in your 40s and you're like, shoot, I want to go make a dressmaker, your kids are in private school, you have a big apartment somewhere that costs you more money, you drive a fancy car, and this is the worst one, the people around you, you think, expect you to live this lifestyle. So letting them down by saying, you know what, I'm going to quit this whole thing and become a dressmaker, they're going to think you're a freak, you think. Meanwhile, newsflash, they all want to make the same change, but nobody has the guts to do it. So back to do the exercise with yourself. Am I where I want to be? Am I generally happy? What can I do to change the situation? And here's the punchline. Start making those changes. Right? You only have one life. You spend a lot of time on this thing that generates some income that we call work. Make sure you spend it with something that you're really passionate about. In today's world, you can make millions, if that's what you want to do, being a dressmaker. You don't have to be a corporate lawyer, or you don't have to work in a job that you don't enjoy.
Tell me more about, I'd like to dive deeper into this. This is an interesting point of yours. when you're thinking about just the wildness perhaps of money making, let's call it, because it's not I don't call it work anymore. I think it's just money making and different aspect of seeing it. When you're thinking about money making and how wide it is, and perhaps like you said, any profession now or somewhat hobbies can probably become a multi-million-dollar business. Tell me more about the paradox of us basically as us meaning basically younger generation having more opportunities to do whatever we like, but then the overwhelming amount of choice and therefore kind of like the paralysis of us basically coming back to a point where money still needs to be first. We still need to be XYZ things because the world expects us to be such things. How can we juggle both to make sure that we can make our passion profitable, or at least as much as we can?
Well, I'm not blind to the fact that you have to make some money to afford food and housing, and at some point your parents are going to kick you out, that kind of thing, right? But what my point is that I can go and get a regular office job, and still I have a choice about what I do in the evenings and on the weekends. And instead of going home and binging Netflix, I could educate myself on some topic, or I could start making experiments around selling my pottery online or whatever it is that I'm passionate about. Most people don't do that. Why? Because they see the Netflix or the Instagram scrolling as a treat for having endured the workday that they had. And I'm not blaming anybody. I do the same thing. There's, probably this week, there was one night I scrolled Instagram for 3 hours, right? And then I was like, frack, what just happened? We all do it because these devices are so addictive and because we want to enjoy ourselves. Of course we do. My point is, you have ample opportunity to change your situation, but you have to put in the work. You have to pursue it next to something that makes money, and then at some point you can change over. We all read these stories about, oh, my side hustle is bringing in $500,000 a year, right? Yes, that may be true, but that person didn't do it from Tuesday to Wednesday. That person has been doing it for the last 3 years, 5 years, when people said it was a stupid idea, and why would they spend time on that? They gave up on going out for beers with their buddies. They probably made all sorts of other sacrifices to get to that point. And so my question to your listeners is, what sacrifice are you willing to make to live the life that you want to have? Ask yourself that. Am I willing to sacrifice nice clothes for a couple of years in order to invest in learning something that can realize my future vision?
I love it. There's this hidden struggle of leadership, but I think of the world in general, and that struggle, I believe, to be the overwhelming importance that we give others on who we ought to be and how we ought to live our lives, and living through others, perhaps having a very, very difficult time to just sit down and say, well, actually, no, here's who I am. I want to do such things, and therefore I will. When you're thinking about and you work with only high performers, so that's even better for my questions. When you think about some of that pressures and how we typically and perhaps naively try to combat it, intense stress, obviously sleepless nights, strained relationships. How many times? Let me just do an analogy. How many times that we go to a business conference and the guy talking basically on stage is very successful, but he's 60 pounds overweight. He had a few partners because again, I have to take basically on the long-term relationships. Is that success? Is that happiness? For some, it might. For me, it's not, right? And it's how perhaps important it is to basically foreshadow of that and have, as you said, a trusted person outside of the boardroom, outside of an advisor and investors, just somebody. It might be a loved one, might be a friend, whoever it is. But how important it is to find that right arm, let's say the number two, perhaps, to just disconnect yourself from that pressure of the world and fully reconnect with who you want to be and what you ought to do, perhaps in your visions. Tell me more about the quest of founding that trusted partner, perhaps a partner in crime.
That's a big one. Because in order to find somebody who can be that person for you, you need to find yourself, right? You need to be who you are. You just mentioned briefly romantic relationships. My partner, we've been together for a number of years now. The other day she said, well, you were totally peacocking when we were dating. And we're like, what now? And what she meant was I was essentially spreading out my feathers and making it look like I was all these fantastic things, which I am, by the way. I'm sure, we can call her in and she can confirm this. Right. But my point in telling this story is we oftentimes, try to be something which we're not because we want to impress a potential partner or a potential colleague or a potential coworker, co-founder or investors, right? And my point here is, my argument here is, the more we cannot do that, the more likely it is that we find somebody as a co-founder or as a partner in life who gets us and loves us for who we are, because they don't have to sort through the peacocking. They don't have to sort through all the things that we're not. So the greatest thing I've ever learned in my life, and I learned it very late in life, is to be who I am. And trust that there's enough people out there in the world that I will still have friends, that I will still have a romantic relationship, that I will still have customers, that I will still have all the things that I need. And it's true. I was afraid when I went from being a very successful entrepreneur to becoming the guy who worked a few hours a week, started meditating every day, doing yoga, jumping in the ocean, all the other things that I learned 5-6 years ago, that my friends would leave me. None of them have left. All of them thinks it's amazing. Everybody's envious of my life. So I think you'll find that if you are who you are, you will still have people around you who will love you. And it's actually much easier because then you don't have to pretend. You don't have to, walk around and be something you're not. That's exhausting. It's exhausting to pretend to be the guy who's always on time. If you're not on time, then don't be on time and be with somebody who loves you for that.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, absolutely. There's some novelty in that, absolutely. And there's also this great quote, which I never remember the author, but behind every great leader is someone who helped them grow. I think it's this foolish understanding of being self-made, which we hear way too often, is not only childish but quite naive. The truth is, nobody get there alone. And they would have a partner, they will have an advisor, they will have investors, they will have customers, they will have whatever basically they are. Nobody gets there alone, and finding that tribe, no matter how small or big it needs to be for you to be happy, I think is something that is wildly underrated. You mentioned very quickly the nature and doing things that you like, and that's a big portion of who you are, obviously, who you became, perhaps, which is mindfulness and nature. When you're thinking about some of the essential practice for leaders, you have obviously extensive hobbies, ocean plunges, meditation, nature walks, and perhaps tell me about, for you specifically, how does these shape and basically the role in maintaining clarity and resilience? How much does that help you with re-engaging with not only yourself but these key components of a leader?
So I am fundamentally an introvert. I need a lot of quiet, a lot of space for myself, for my brain and for my system to just kind of power down, because a big part of my life until 4 years ago, and it still is out in the public, motivating people, motivating investors, selling stuff, being the energy. And so I needed that sacred space. And so for me, spending time in nature is a place where I can breathe freely. I don't have to be anything for anybody. The ocean plunges gives me physical enjoyment because it's cold and I can feel I'm alive, and I know it's good for me biologically, and I know it's good for me mentally. I'm doing something for myself. Same thing with meditation. I essentially force all my clients to meditate. And it's kind of funny when you have like these type A personalities that just want to go, 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 go. And I force them to sit still for 30 seconds. They look at me like I'm the devil. They don't understand. But what happens is your brain gets a break. It's always on up here when you're an entrepreneur. It gets a break where it can kind of power down a little bit. And because of that, the swings that we were talking about earlier in terms of high dopamine and low sort of depression states, they get smaller because the brain can better flex its muscle. Again, I want to go back to the gym. If you're doing push-ups, for example, if you keep doing push-ups, I don't know how many, you look like a strong guy. You could probably do 200 push-ups, right? But at some point, if you keep going, your arms are going to fail. But if you do push-ups and stop in the plank, which is when your arms are stretched and your toes are on the ground, just for a few seconds, then you can keep going because the muscle got the rest. And it's the same thing with our brain. Our brain is a giant muscle that needs to rest. For me, that rest happens in nature, in the water, with meditation, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah, John Weir said, I think quite beautifully, in every walk in nature, one receives far more than he seeks. Nature is such a key component of life, as it is not only alive, trees and so on, but it gives you this connection with spirits. At least that's how I see it. Every single time I walk in nature, I feel my sixth sense. I feel my soul. I feel my spirits. When you're thinking about that spiritual components, we talk at length about that physical and mental component. When you're thinking about the spiritual component, what does that mean for you specifically? Perhaps just if you can put it into a definitions that help me a lot for the remaining of my questions. But how does that? So what it is first and foremost, and then how does that overlays with the two other components, which are a bit more straightforward, the physical and the mental world? Tell me more about that within your approach.
So spirituality for me is the understanding that there's something beyond us. I don't know how that manifests itself. Some people believe it manifests in the person who's sitting in a cloud somewhere. Other people believe in other things. For me personally, it's the realization that I am just but a small, tiny little freckle in this thing that's called our part of the universe. And so spending time in nature, I look at trees, for example, and I think about their branches, and I think about the life of trees, and I think about the way the trees were designed, and I think about the changing trees have and what they have to withstand and stuff. And so it just reminds me that there's a lot of intelligent systems, including trees, that are beyond my comprehension. I don't know anything about what it is to be a tree, for example. We don't know if a tree has a conscience. We think it doesn't, but honestly, we don't know. And I'm not going off my rocker here. The point is just to be reminded that as humans, we think we're kind of the ultimate beings. But actually, as Elon said not too long ago, is there life somewhere else in the universe or, where we're in the world? Absolutely. Because it is so big, we have no idea what's anywhere. So it is inconceivable, statistically and otherwise, that there somewhere is not something that is as quote-unquote evolved as human beings, if we believe that we're the ultimate species on this planet that we call Earth, right? So back to answering your question quite a more short, it's the understanding that there is so much I do not understand. There are so many things that are smarter than I am. So back to my approach, I need to learn from those. I need to observe what's going on beyond the human body and mind and think about how I can take what I see and make myself a stronger version of me by understanding these systems in nature, for example. And that's what I do with my clients. I mean, I literally have them go touch a tree. And again, they think that's kind of new agey, but once they do it, but I mean, try this, Sam. So I think it's morning where you are, and I don't know what your day looks like, and if you're near a tree. But next time you're outside, near a tree, just go over and put your hand on it and just really be there in that moment and feel what you're feeling. And then tell me later if that didn't move you in some way that you didn't expect.
I will. I will. I know this is quite interesting. I love the term new agey, by the way. That's why I kind of laughed. But the and this is interesting because to me the connection with spirits, and perhaps I call it God, even if some people don't. And that connection is more important. It is critical actually to who I am as a person, not only to calm my ego, perhaps. That I think that's a very good point of yours, which is understanding just how small and quite insignificant in the grand scheme of things you are. Perhaps you're very significant to your loved ones and people around you, but that's a very minor portions of Earth, yet along the universe, which we know very little of how big it is. But that gives me purpose. That gives me empathy. That gives me the understanding in which I can become who I am through trusting the divine. And that is a key component of who I am and how I operate in the world. I love what Theodore Roosevelt has to say on this, which is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it is such a key component of how I operate business wise, but also otherwise with anyone, with the cashier, the waiter, whoever it is, this understanding that we are interconnected and therefore my well-being coexists with yours. You seem to be very much the same way. You strike me as a gentleman. You strike me perhaps outside of when you were trying to trying to get your partner initially, it seems like, but you seems to be a very open-minded, very aware person. When you're thinking about ways in which CEOs and founders can lead their team more effectively by prioritizing basically these key components, empathy, clear communications, and holistic approach, how does that unfold with their constant pursuit of high performance? How can we make sure that both of those are empowered in a meaningful fashion?
I was talking to a founder about that same topic literally this morning. And my argument was with him that in order to get high performance, you need to know how to drive the car the best you can drive that car. So if you're driving around the racetrack in an Oldsmobile, I'm going to use a brand from your market, right? An Oldsmobile or a Chevrolet or something. You're going to drive that car in a different way than if you're driving a Porsche. Because the Porsche has a different suspension, it has a different steering, it has a different center of gravity, it has a different traction, all that other stuff because of the wheel size. And it's the same thing comes to working with people and wanting to get the best performance out of them. We talked a little bit about it when we spoke about culture, right? But if you and I were working together, Sam, my most important role as your leader, let's say I was your boss in this scenario, is to fully understand how best to get the best out of your engine, out of your facilities. And I typically, when I have employees, I said to them, listen, you are here in this company because I believe that you are the best person for what we need you to do. But in order for us to accomplish that, I need to know you so well that I can help you tweak that engine so you can deliver your max performance. And max performance is not working 200 hours a week. Max performance is when you get on the racetrack, you know how to take the corners. You know when to accelerate and when to brake. You know when to come in for a pit stop. But if you're driving an Oldsmobile, we're going to do it in this way and get the most out of that Oldsmobile that we can. And if you're driving a Porsche, we're going to drive the Porsche differently and get the most out of that. And that's the same thing with employees. So you really need to understand your people. One of the many mistakes that we all make, and certainly inexperienced leaders make, is they do not spend enough time fully understanding what their people are capable of. They give them a job description, they give them a job, and then they're like, you figure it out. And then they get disappointed when they don't figure it out in the way that they would have figured it out, when they do a different solution. So spend more time with your people, really get to know them. If they're not fit for purpose, if they're not fit for the role, then fix it. Give them something else, or honestly get rid of them because it's not serving anybody if the Oldsmobile is not the right car for this track, for this moment. But if it is the right car and it is on the track, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to them that it gets driven the right way. I don't have a car. um, so I think I used to be a Porsche. I think I used to be a Porsche that wanted to go fast, take tight corners, win at every race, look good while doing it, and be known as the ultimate driving performance machine. That's what I think I used to be. Today, I think I'm more like a maybe, I don't know, a Volvo, right? It's like it gets the job done. It can perform well in most conditions. It's reliable. It's safe. It's fairly designed, but some people don't really like the way that it looks. Yeah, I think that's the car that I am today.
Interesting. A bit more minimalistic, but a bit more perhaps conservative, a bit more, I suppose, reliable as well. Than the
It's a little more
Porsche.
wise.
A bit
Some of my
more.
clients refer to me as the wise monk. I don't know if it's because I'm bald or not, but I like to think that I've gotten to a point now where I don't need to prove as much as I used to. And that makes me more independent, which makes me more impactful to the people that I work with. Because I don't, as I said to you before, I don't really care about anybody but my client. And so if my client says, you know what, I kind of want to quit this life and do something else, I'm like, okay, let's figure out what that looks like.
For you,
I
when
don't,
was that haha moment of that click of, hey, actually I don't need to perhaps impress anyone. I can just be myself and the rest will just follow. Was that the precise moment that you got that distinction?
I think it was after, I think I was forced into that by becoming sick. I would not have been here today if I hadn't been sick. I wouldn't have made that change myself. I wouldn't have woken up one day and be like, wait a minute, I'm not living the life I want to live. I want to do something else, which is why I'm so passionate about helping others to do that today, because I know it's just a better way. So I didn't have that aha moment, but I think once I came out on the other side and I started doing this work, I was like, wait a minute, who am I as an individual, right? I've always been somebody. In my first company, I was selling intelligence services to market research services, and I remember, this is a brief story, and I'll keep it brief, but I went out to United Airlines in Chicago, and I had gotten a meeting by saying, hey, I'm going to be in Chicago anyway. Can I get 15 minutes? I have some ideas for your loyalty program. And the woman was like, no, you can't, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, I got her for like 7:45 in the morning to 8 o'clock at a local Starbucks. And then I bought a plane ticket, and then I flew out. I was not going to Chicago, but I made that up as an excuse to go, right? So I go and I talk to her. I give her all my ideas. Like, you should do this thing and that thing, and I've seen this, and I've worked with a hotel company, and I basically just shared a bunch of stuff with her. She wasn't listening half the time, right? She was drinking her Starbucks like, why the frack am I here with this funny-looking Danish guy? 2 weeks go by, and she calls me and says, could you come back to Chicago? Because I actually want to listen to some of those ideas, and I actually want to pay attention. And I want to bring my marketing team in. And so I went out there and I did that. And I said something in that meeting that is the point of this story. I said to them, I said, guys, I don't care if you do this with my company or with somebody else. I honestly don't. The only thing I care about is you doing what's the right thing for you, your business, and your customers. And I happen to think that this is it. But if you give me the business or somebody else, we're still going to be friends. And then I left, right? That was it. And so I thought, okay, that was fun. Nothing's going to come of it. Some months pass. She calls me again and she goes, Peter, never, ever, ever have I heard somebody be so generous with their ideas, not expecting anything in return. And I know you don't have a big office, and I know you probably can't pay your mortgage because you don't have my business, and you're still willing to walk away from it. That's somebody who really, truly cares about ideas. That's somebody I want to work with. You got a contract from us. We have this other problem. Please come help us solve it. My point, Sam, is it's easy to be independent when you don't need to make money. But if you can be independent when you need to make money, people will see that and say, this person really, truly cares. Back to your quote from Roosevelt before. I think it was Roosevelt, right? Exactly. People don't care about you until they know how much you care. And that's the best way to live a life. If you really care about people, good things will come.
Oh, you love that one. Okay. Yeah, it's a great one. It's a great quote. Yeah. It's a great quote.
He's one of my favorites too.
That he is, absolutely. And there's no way to you can't win a negotiation if you're not ready to leave the table empty-handed.
But I wasn't even negotiating. I mean, that's my point.
No, that's right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. In your case, it was even more.
Care. I should have cared deeply. I had 2 cats in a studio apartment in Brooklyn. I needed to make some money, but it just wasn't. It's never been a part of me to do something for the money. I've always done something for the idea, and that's led to where I am today.
I love it, Mr. Peter Sorgenfrei. It was an incredible time spent with you in discussing all these ideas and business insights. I would love if you could share some of your last thoughts with our audience, please.
I think if you're listening to this, and as I said earlier, if you're wondering if you are where you want to be or need to be, or frame it whichever way you want, you owe it to yourself to sit down and carefully think about what it is that you would like to accomplish or where you want to be, and then see what steps you can take to make that change. We're not talking about radical change. We're talking about adjusting your day-to-day so that you little by little get to the point where you're supposed to be in life. Most people don't get to experience that until they're in their 40s and 50s. It's called Lebenswende. It was, I think it was either Jung or Freud who came up with that. Basically, it's the midlife crisis, right? But if you're a 25-year-old listening to this, make that change now, and the next 25 years will be much more enjoyable than all of your peers who are not doing this work on themselves.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.